So let's get started. So we want to welcome Denyse Stoneback, who is doing the presentation tonight. Denyse is a former state representative, native of Skokie. She graduated Niles North High School, got a bachelor's degree from Marquette University in criminology and law studies in Spanish, and a master's degree from University of Madrid in Spain. Then following Sandy Hook school shooting, Denyse, a longtime editor and project manager, founded the nonprofit People for a Safer Society, which has become a premier gun violence prevention organization in the Chicago area. She also helped found and build the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition. In 2020, Denyse was elected state representative of the 16th District, which includes parts of Skokie, Lincolnwood, Chicago, and Morton Grove. She's the first woman and the first Asian American to represent the 16th District. During her time in the legislature, she co-founded the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus. This is what I know Denyse for, is she and I both have been working gun violence prevention for years. The Gun Violence Prevention Caucus in the Illinois House and introduced multiple gun violence prevention bills. She was the author and chief sponsor of a major bill to improve the Illinois Firearms Restraining Order, which passed and was signed into law in 2021. She's also nationally known for knowledge and work on the Extreme Risk Protection Order, which is the same as the Firearms Restraining Order here in Illinois, also known as red flag laws. She founded and leads the National Extreme Risk Protection Order Working Group. She continues to be a leading voice for bold and comprehensive change to reduce gun violence. In addition, Denyse has been a voice for ethics in government and elections. She introduced 5 bills related to elections and ethics, including truth in politics. And I think if any of you were paying attention to some of the recent elections, you know how valuable this work that Denyse has started can be to get us back to civil discussions from candidates in elections. So Denyse, go ahead, get started.
Thank you so much, Jim and Bill and everyone. Thank you for that opportunity to speak today. Bill, Jim, and everyone here, I'm really delighted to be here to discuss a very real and serious threat to our American society, the lack of truth in politics and political campaigns. So, as we've all witnessed in elections at the national, state, and local levels in our communities, political campaigns can bring out the worst in people, with some candidates seeming to subscribe to the theory that it's okay to say almost anything in order to get elected. Many campaigns are fraught with misinformation. However, if unethical behavior, mudslinging, and misinformation are allowed, how can we count on these people, if elected, to be ethical public servants? The answer is we can't. If politicians can win elections by telling lies, there's no indication that they will serve the public interest or their constituents. The fact that they won through deception will only have reinforced the effectiveness of their lying. And as seen in examples across the world, without any basic check on their behavior, unscrupulous leaders will be at liberty to line their pockets by colluding with corporations, steal taxpayer money, and hold on to power by arresting their opponents and even murdering journalists. In his book, Harvard professor Cass Sunstein said that when political leaders lie, they cut the legs out from under the democratic process by making it difficult or impossible for citizens to know whom to trust. They discredit the very idea of self-government and make all things doubtful. So let's take a brief look at a few unscrupulous candidates, their lies, and the result. We've seen it to some degree or another in elections. Some of us have even personally experienced it. Campaigns in which mudslinging, deception, and lies are purposefully used to influence voters in campaigns. While all of us can surely think of examples, in the 2016 presidential election, we witnessed Donald Trump tell an inordinate amount of falsehoods in a campaign that led to his presidential victory. When the news media fact-checked his statements and called him out for the falsehoods, he pushed back and attacked the media, calling them dishonest and corrupt. Oxford Dictionary even named post-truth the word of the year in 2016. They defined it as circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. But Trump's election was certainly not the only race where lies were the foundation of the path to victory. Entire articles have been written about Congressman George Santos, who, as a candidate, told a plethora of lies, including about where he went to school and the companies he worked for, in order to get elected. Despite facing federal charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and making false statements to Congress, he has refused to step down. And just yesterday, another indictment with 23 counts was filed against him. While they may receive less attention in the media, it happens in races at the state and local levels as well. And this affects us every day. All the candidates who were elected using campaign tactics based on deception and lies are representing us and our values in government. There are, however, some ethical candidates. I'd like to take a moment to describe one who, instead of feeding the flames of a lie that benefited his candidacy, decried it. Just a month before the presidential election, Senator John McCain defended his opponent, then Senator Barack Obama, at a town hall event in Minnesota, when a constituent who believed lies spread by a conspiracy theory told McCain that she couldn't trust Obama. McCain, in his response to her, said of Obama, "No, ma'am, he's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have some disagreements with on fundamental issues. And that's what this campaign is all about." The Washington Post named it one of McCain's most courageous political moments. The point this example shows is that partisans, indeed all opposing candidates, should disagree and debate the issues without demonizing each other or telling lies. The problem of falsehoods in campaigns is incredibly widespread. Keep in mind that this is a nonpartisan issue that is prevalent in both major parties and occurs in primary as well as general elections. Now, I know we're in football season here, but I'd like to take a moment to talk about the game of soccer. Here, we can note that in soccer, a player has two chances when they commit a foul: a yellow card or caution for their first violation, and a red card in which they're ejected after breaking the laws of the game a second time. As voters, we need to realize that currently there are no yellow or red cards for unethical behavior being enforced in the political playing field of campaigns. Essentially, unscrupulous and dishonest candidates and political players can often lie with impunity to manipulate voters. It's worth considering, what would the World Cup look like if that were the case with soccer? How would it affect the outcomes? And most importantly, why is it tolerated in political campaigns where voters are making critical decisions about who will represent them in government? Year after year, people feel exhausted after elections from the misinformation, divisiveness, and all-around nastiness. This is dangerous to our democracy in several ways. First, because voters are being manipulated, campaigns are unfair. The playing field is not level. Unethical people have an upper hand in elections, and ethical candidates get left behind. Alternatively, if one candidate decides to respond to a dishonest attack in a similar manner, the situation quickly becomes a race to the bottom. Disinformation, hateful language, mudslinging, and lies result in disgusted and frustrated voters. Lying is a breach of trust. When one candidate lies to voters to deceive and manipulate them, this harms the relationship between the candidate and the public, which can result in the public becoming distrustful of everyone in politics and government, decrease voter turnout in elections, as well as civic engagement. Also, it makes ethical people less likely to become involved in politics and run for office. So, first, let's take a look at the audience for all of the misinformation, lies, and mudslinging: the voters. Most people understand that the truth is colored in politics and campaigns, but not everyone realizes the extent to which the truth can be stretched, warped, and outright violated, with few, if any, repercussions. Voters should be aware of the campaign tactics used to manipulate them. Author Hannah Callahan describes such tactics in her guide for voters, Voting for Ethics. One tactic, whispering campaigns, is to spread rumors and slanderous statements quietly to damage an opponent's reputation. A push poll is one where, under the pretense of conducting a legitimate poll, defamatory or negative information is conveyed. The infamous October surprise is a term for a negative attack that is revealed shortly before an election to influence its outcome, giving the target of the attack little or no time to respond. Voters should also be aware of the power of lies. Why do people believe lies? Because most of the time, we believe other people. Generally speaking, we trust other people, even when we should not. This general phenomenon is called the truth bias. Indeed, if people are provided with information that has clearly been discredited, they often tend to rely on that information when making judgments. So with this in mind, it's not hard to understand how some voters believed the lies told about Hillary Clinton in the 2016 campaign. In fact, in a study published earlier this year by Cambridge University Press, a research team conducted an experiment in which they examined the effects of the truth bias on mock jurors and judges. They gave participants information and explicitly told them that some of the information was false. However, they discovered that the participants did not adequately discount the false information, but instead were influenced by it. Clearly, the truth bias shows the incredible power of lying and therefore the danger it poses when it comes to spreading falsehoods in campaigns. Social media has become a viable tool for misinformation in campaigns. Irrelevant and misleading campaign communications are prevalent. Nobel Prize winner and Filipino journalist Maria Ressa has said that social media is creating a virus of lies, with sites that are biased against facts. There is a lack of regulation for information technology, which is allowing bad actors to proliferate and, in the case of elections, to do damage and win. Broadcasters have little power over the censorship of legally qualified candidates for public office. If you think someone is censoring false statements, you are incorrect. Don't believe what you see on TV. Like many, I believe that misinformation and mudslinging in campaigns do not represent the true spirit of our community, state, and country. If we hold a high standard in a court of law, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, why would we allow people trying to get elected to represent us to lie and not be held accountable? No one should be able to lie to voters to mislead them and interfere with fair elections. We need measures to prevent this from happening and to hold bad actors accountable. When I was in office, I saw a need to level the playing field in Illinois. So in an effort to help ensure fairness and integrity in political campaigns, decrease political polarity, increase civic engagement, I introduced legislation called the Truth in Politics Act. When crafting the bill, I researched other states' laws and discovered that prohibiting false statements in some manner is on the books in 27 states, including California, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Colorado, but not Illinois. These other states' laws typically make it a crime to knowingly or recklessly distribute false information about a candidate or an election. The Truth in Politics Act would prohibit false statements, libel, and defamation in political advertising in campaigns and ensure that candidates commit to a code of fair campaign practices. While this legislation has stalled, there are other ways that we can help fight deception in campaigns. So the public deserves reliable facts as they make these critical decisions about who will represent them. Campaign communications should present only fair, relevant, and truthful information to voters. Safeguards are needed to improve the accuracy of statements. But how can we put the power back into the hands of the voters and encourage ethical campaigns until these safeguards are put in place? Voters themselves can demand it using Illinois' already existing Code of Fair Campaign Practices. Candidates in 7 states, including Illinois, may sign a pledge promising to conduct their campaigns in a fair and honest manner. In 1989, the Illinois legislature passed legislation to encourage every candidate for public office in this state to subscribe to the Code of Fair Campaign Practices and follow the basic principles of decency, honesty, and fair play. This was in order to encourage healthy competition and open discussion of issues and candidate qualifications and discourage practices that cloud issues or unfairly attack opponents. Let's take a closer look at just what the code says. For our purposes here, we will look at the points briefly, but you will be able to download the Illinois Code of Fair Campaign Practices in the chat. In the first point, the candidate commits to conduct their campaign openly and publicly and limit attacks on their opponent to legitimate challenges to their record. The second says they will not use or permit the use of character defamation, whispering campaigns, libel, slander, or scurrilous attacks on any candidate or his or her personal or family life. In the third point, the candidate pledges to not use or permit any appeal to negative prejudice based on race, sex, sexual orientation, religion, or national origin. The fourth point speaks directly to the use of campaign material, and the candidate pledges not to use any sort that misrepresents, distorts, or otherwise falsifies the facts. And then the next 2 points reproach dishonest or unethical practices, and the candidate pledges to defend and uphold the right of the voter to full and equal participation in the electoral process. Lastly, the candidate commits to immediately and publicly repudiating methods from others that the candidate has pledged not to use or condone. So, how does it work? What is the process, and how do candidates sign on? At the time a political committee files its statement of organization, the State Board of Elections or the county clerk provides the political committee with a blank form of the Code of Fair Campaign Practices and a copy of the provisions of the article. It's important to note that subscription to the code is voluntary. How do you know if your elected officials have signed on to the code? You can look it up on the Illinois Board of Elections website. Just go to their website at www.elections.il.gov, and then you go to campaign disclosure and search for the candidate under candidate disclosure search. You enter the candidate's name, select the political committee and the election year, and note whether Fair Campaign says yes or no. With the political climate looking bleak, you may be wondering, what can people do? Let's look at how we can reverse the race to the bottom. We can take 6 critical steps towards a more honest, civil, and fairer campaign season. First, as voters, we need to be informed and skeptical of information that looks like it could be misinformation or an unfair attack. During elections, remember the truth bias and its effect on all of us. Learn the hallmarks of an ethical candidate and learn the tricks unethical candidates use to gain an upper hand. In other words, as voters, we must be aware of the game and know that in the current political climate, unscrupulous candidates and campaigns can get away with virtually anything. Next, while signing on is voluntary in Illinois, the Code of Fair Campaign Practices has the potential to be used as an effective tool by voters at the grassroots level to get candidates to commit to running ethical campaigns. If a candidate asks for a signature to get on the ballot or support in their election, a voter can ask them to prove that they've signed on to the code and withhold support if they refuse or fail to do so. This would put the power back in our hands, the hands of the voters. We can attend town hall meetings, candidate forums, and debates, and publicly ask candidates to sign on to the code. We can write letters to the editor about the code, asking all candidates to sign on, and promote our commitment to ethics in political campaigns. It's important to generate news media attention on ethical campaigns. We can ask the news media to use the code in their endorsement process and their candidate questionnaires. And let's not underestimate the importance of generating awareness around the code by talking with neighbors, friends, and other voters in our communities. Finally, here are some resources if you would like to take a deeper dive into the subject of falsehoods and ethical campaigns. The Markkula Center for Applied Ethics of Santa Clara University is a forum for research and discussion in all areas of applied ethics. And they published a guide called Voting for Ethics. This free, downloadable, nonpartisan how-to guide helps voters identify the hallmarks of an ethical candidate. The center also published a guide for candidates and political consultants on how to run an ethical campaign. I've also listed 2 books of interest, Liars, Falsehoods, and Free Speech in an Age of Deception by Professor Cass Sunstein, and Pro-Truth, a practical plan for putting truth back into politics by Gleb Tupersky and Tim Ward. On this side, please note that you can connect with me on Facebook and via email. There is a private Facebook page called Citizens for Ethical Campaigns, and feel free to send an email request to join. And I, of course, wanted to end the presentation with an appropriate quote. Former First Lady Michelle Obama once said, "When they go low, we go high." So together, let's bring this guiding mantra back to more campaigns in Illinois. Finally, again, here is the ask or the steps that we as voters can take to encourage more ethical campaigns. Again, I want to thank Bill and Jim, all the leaders and members of NWSOFA and Indivisible Illinois. Thank you for the invitation to speak. And I want to thank every single one of you that's attending for your attention to this really serious issue. And now I think we're going to take a few questions in the chat. Jim, do you want to read any questions that may have come up in the chat?
Yeah, Denyse, I would really want to appreciate your taking the time to go through this with us. One of the things that I'd like to add to your list of things that we can do is actually a suggestion that Bill came up with a few weeks ago, is contact the newspaper when they are interviewing candidates and kind of come up with a recommendation. Have the newspaper ask the candidate, have they signed on to this document? If anybody here is a member of the League of Women Voters, they hold candidate forums. Make sure that is a question that is being asked at these candidate forums. I think some of these candidates would have a hard time signing on to this. I can tell you from my experience in the municipal election that happened here in Barrington just a few months ago, the mudslinging was unacceptable, and it didn't stop with the election. Candidates were being vilified continuously. So how can a candidate demonstrate to voters that they have signed on? I think you went on Board of Elections website, is that correct?
Right. You can always take a screenshot of the Board of Elections website, but copies are available upon request at the Board of Elections. So voters can certainly find out and verify whether the candidate has signed on to the code.
So here's a question from Rosalind Davis. How can C-SPAN have an open forum in the morning and call out things that are said that are not true? We are in such a state of in the country that election for young people seems to be a popularity contest. I don't know if you want to try to address that.
I think that that's a very good point. And even if the news media point out the falsehoods, or if people are listening to the news, the power of lies is so powerful that maybe you heard the lies and the mudslinging, but you didn't hear the news media setting the record straight. And so there's a lot of confusion. And I think that happens all the time. And that's why we really need these safeguards in place.
So I've got another question for you. What kind of support when you introduced that bill, the Truth in Politics Act, what kind of support did you get? And do you think we can get that passed? Well, what kind of support do you need for that?
So when I introduced the Truth in Politics Act, I did get immediate bipartisan support. So there were former colleagues of mine that signed on to be co-sponsor or chief co-sponsor on both sides of the aisle. And it got some good media attention. I was interviewed by the news media on Zoom, and there was a lot of interest for it, but it was late in the session and committees were not being called. So unfortunately, it stalled. However, I think with grassroots activism, advocates, and certainly organizational support, it could pass because there's bipartisan interest in it. And hopefully we'll see it reintroduced and passed in the 103rd General Assembly.
To get it reintroduced, do we need to support you? Need to work with another representative to get this introduced, or is there somebody already lined up to do that for you?
Certainly, I think the chief co-sponsors who sponsored the bill before were interested in reintroducing it or seeing it reintroduced. So we'll have to take a look at that and see, but there was definite interest. And if everyone here reaches out to their state representatives and state senators and says, we support this and would like to see it reintroduced, that speaks volumes. So I would encourage people to also go ahead and do that, say that they support it and would like to see it reintroduced.
Did it get a bill number, or will it get a new bill number when it gets reintroduced?
It would get a new bill number, and I can drop the old one in the chat, but it would get a new bill number because we're in a different General Assembly.
We'll need to get that so we can follow it. That would get reintroduced in next session, starting in January of 2024?
Actually,
Hopefully.
anyone can reintroduce a bill at any point. So it could be reintroduced tomorrow if there were the political will and someone reintroduced it. But it's important that people express their support for that measure, for it to be reintroduced, and then for it to be heard in committee and get support to pass.
So if it gets reintroduced, say tomorrow, and gets a new bill number, would that bill number carry over to 2024?
Until the next General Assembly. So the General Assemblies are every 2 years in the House.
Do you see anything else that can be done to make campaigns more ethical and reduce political campaign divisiveness?
Yeah, actually, one thing that I think is really important is increased education. Well, meetings like this increase education and awareness, but definitely more education, especially for young people who are preparing themselves and going to be voters for the first time, for them to be aware of how elections work and what is going on and happening. I actually did introduce a different bill when I was in office, civics education and elections for high school aged students. Certainly, meetings like this and organizations like the League of Women Voters, they do a lot around education, and that is critical.
And I wish I had asked you this question before, Denyse, but if people on this call are part of another organization that would like you to do this presentation for them, are you open to doing that for them?
Certainly, I am open to hearing all requests and pending my availability and everything. Everyone can contact me at the truthinpoliticsillinois@gmail.com that I shared with everyone, and I'm happy to respond.
So, Bill, you've got a question.
We're actually talking about two different things here. There is a code of fair practices that exists today, and then there's this law that you've been working on. Those are two separate things, or are they the same thing combined?
No, that's a good question. Yes, absolutely. There are two separate pieces of legislation. The Truth in Politics bill is the legislation that is wide-reaching and would make defamation, slander, libel illegal. It follows the 27 other states that prohibit, to some extent, false statements during electoral campaigns. And the Truth in Politics Act also would require candidates to sign on to the Illinois Code of Fair Campaign Practices. Now, the Illinois Code of Fair Campaign Practices already exists. It was passed in 1989, and it exists. There are candidates who do sign on. However, it is voluntary. So not all candidates in Illinois subscribe to the code. So I think something immediately that everyone can do is just encourage all elected officials and all candidates for public office to sign on to the already existing Illinois Code of Fair Campaign Practices.
Just so everybody knows, this meeting is being hosted by NWSOFA, which Northwest Suburbs Organizing Fraction, and we have various issue groups. This particular group meeting is being hosted by the Restore Our Democracy group. We call it ROD, which this has a whole lot to do. This is fundamental, in my opinion, to restoring our democracy. Charles Paddock has a question. Go ahead, Charles.
Yes, two-part. Will the sponsoring political parties in any fashion be held accountable for their candidates that they put forward on the ballot? And number two, what sort of enforcement is your legislation provides for? I mean, what is the penalty if I say various things about my opponent? What conceivably could happen as a result of it to me? Thank you.
No, thank you, Charles, for that question. First part, I just want to make sure that I understand it correctly. It is, how do political parties regulate their candidates and the statements for their candidates? Is that right?
Well, I'm active in choosing candidates for a political party. And are we held accountable in any fashion under your legislation?
Under the legislation, no, it does not speak to political parties. It's nonpartisan. No formal safeguards that I know of in major political parties. Certainly, it would be good if all the political parties subscribed and encouraged their candidates, their political parties, to subscribe to ethical campaigns and to sign on to the code. I think that they are well positioned to put pressure on candidates in their party to run ethical campaigns. The second part of your question is what could happen in the legislation? Well, when I crafted the Truth in Politics Act bill, I did look at penalties in other states, and there are certain violations that are even a Class A misdemeanor. So they make it a crime. It's a serious infraction.
So Denyse, there's another question in the chat from Marianne Quinlan. Is the voluntary code, a fair campaign, applicable to all candidates seeking votes in Illinois, including federal, local, like local school boards, et cetera, even library boards?
The PDF from the Board of Elections, and it says all candidates in Illinois. So all candidates, local, state, and federal candidates can sign on to it. And though the state actually regulates the state candidates and the local counties regulate the county candidates and the more local candidates, so they're not necessarily is a list, so to speak, of all the candidates in Illinois who signed on.
So another question in the chat from Janice Geider. How do you motivate both parties or all parties to willingly participate in the code without a law requiring it to comply? Is it similar to the Open Meetings Act?
So I think the best way to motivate political candidates is to show that the voters show the political candidates that they are not in agreement with dishonest and unethical campaigns. And if voters can show enough frustration and make this an issue that is being discussed, I think that's extremely powerful. And then the political candidates will take notice, and hopefully it will generate enough pressure to pass legislation and real safeguards.
I agree. One thing that the ROD group has discussed in previous presentations, like money and politics, we talked about different laws that were finally enacted at the federal level, but we couldn't get them passed at the federal level until there was momentum at the state level. And so what happened, for example, same-sex marriage, all of a sudden states started approving that, and guess what? Then we have a federal law. So I think, like what Denyse is saying, is if we see even this code that's out there, if we as voters make an issue of it, I mean, we can do something at the grassroots level, I think, on this. And if we do enough of it, we can get Denyse the support that she's looking for to get this law passed, this act passed. Comment, Denyse, do you think that's...
I really, as a founder of a grassroots nonprofit in Illinois that you mentioned earlier, I have a decade of experience in grassroots activism and believe in the power of grassroots activism. I think that's pretty much the way of bringing back the power into the hands of the voter. And the voter saying, I am disgusted, I am frustrated, I don't want to experience another nasty, divisive political campaign at the next election, and I'm going to do something about it. And I'm going to ask every candidate who asks for my support, for my signature to get on a ballot, for my vote, for a monetary donation. I'm going to ask them if they've signed on to this voluntary Illinois Code of Fair Campaign Practices. And if they haven't, I'm going to ask them, well, will you if I ask you to? And if you refuse to, then why are you refusing? Do you agree with dishonest, nasty campaigns that are unethical? Because I don't. So, I mean, it really is a statement at the heart of our values of what we'd like to see in American political campaigns. And it will make a huge difference. So definitely, grassroots activism is the way to push this issue forward.
And look what we've been able to do in the last 10 years with grassroots activism with gun violence. The laws that we now have momentum, and some of these gun lobby groups are losing their strength.
Yeah.
So we're getting laws passed solely because we have decided to stand up and say, we've had enough of this. And so I think the same approach for what you're doing now is what we can do. So Bill, you've got a question. Go ahead.
I kind of been looking around the people who are on the screen here, and there's very few shy folks. Most of us are activists, are becoming activists. I visualize what we'll be doing is we'll be carrying this in our pocket when we go to these meetings with candidates. And we will stand up and ask them if they're aware of this. First off, are you aware of it? Because I think you had said in a previous meeting that many people are not aware that this actually exists. I think I would stand up and ask, are you aware of this code? And I would put it out there. And if they, oh yeah, then I would actually say, would you commit now to signing this bill? And if they don't have that opportunity, I would go up afterwards and ask them to sign it. Now, we may not get very far, but that will raise the pain threshold. And I think it'll get people going, oh, I better understand what this is. And then when we get two people or three or four on a dais or on a panel, we can bring it up, and two or three people one could ask the question, are you aware of it? Number two, the second person could say, will you sign it? And the third one would challenge those that would not sign it. I agree totally with what Jim was saying before. We need to talk to the Daily Herald and the Patch and other local papers to get this on the candidate response form that they fill out prior, so that people get a chance to see candidate X will sign it, candidate Y said no. I think that would be great. I mean, there are things that we can do. And as NWSOFA, we are going to be advancing this information. We'll be putting it out on a 1-minute activist, asking people to do. The first thing is letting their senators and their representatives in Illinois know about the bill that is out there. Ask them to get behind it. That is the bill. And then we would start a campaign to encourage Daily Herald, Patch, and the 3 or 4 others that are out there to include into their standard package.
Denyse, any final words before we sign off?
Just thank you so much to NWSOFA and all of you for your attention to this really important issue. It really is a serious threat to our democracy. And I'm so happy to see interest around it. And I hope that with grassroots activism, we move the issue forward. So thank you.
And thank you, Denyse. And thank you, everybody, for attending. So I think we'll close the meeting at this point.